as a journalist in 1980. And my working life just happened to coincide with an uprising, And I wrote the first story that was the beginning of all of this. It was essentially a story. It was a Sunday, and I got a phone call because now people were getting to know I'm at the Cape Times. So they called me, and it was Zaki Ahmad who called me. He was a young guy in Hanover Park. And he said to me, Zubeida, can you come to Broad Road this afternoon with a photographer because we're going to protest at the Coloured Affairs Department. So he didn't give me more than that. So I told my editor, and then we went through. When I came there was no protest, but there was, on the fence of the Coloured Affairs Department, there were a lot of placards about the problems at a school in Hanover Park. I can't remember if it was Crystal, but one of those schools. I must actually check that. They were having various problems, and then I wrote the story. And then that story became the next story and eventually led to the principal being removed. And that was a front page headline story. And eventually they formed the Committee of 81, which was the schools and the university, well, UWC mainly. And I covered those meetings. And then eventually in June 1980, every year in June the 17th and 18th, when the protests, June the 16th, 17th and 18th, were usually days where people called on people to stay at home and protest, or just stay at home. This night of the 17th and the 18th, the police shot and killed many people in Lavender Hill, in Elsis River, in Bishop Lavis, in many places. And we didn't know who these people were or what, but we just knew that we understood that there were about 42 people killed. Tony and whoever else, news editor, they decided to ask me to go and find these people, these families. And I was too naive, I think. Some people say they should never have let you go do that. For me it was just a great opportunity, and I was very keen. They asked me if I would go. They said they'll support me in any way. If I need a car, if I need a driver, if I need whatever. So I said I just needed a car, and I needed to know how much time I must take. And I said I needed somebody from the local area. I need to find somebody in the local, not in the southern suburbs, because I knew Lavendale and those Retreat, I knew those areas. I'm in Wynberg. But for the northern suburbs, Bishop Lavis and those areas, I needed somebody, and I had somebody in mind. For 2 weeks, I had the most life-changing, I suppose, experience, meeting all these families and them telling me their stories. Eventually, after 2 weeks, Tony had asked me now, how far are you? So I said I'd gotten to, I can't remember now, was it 26 families of the 42. And then he said I must just write a story. He tells me, just write everything you've got. So I sat at home with my little portable typewriter on my bed, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote. And eventually they sat with me and they got legal opinion on what could be published. But they published, when I came into the Cape Times, the one day was in July, I think it was July the 24th. Everybody was looking at me, some not happy, some smiling. And I didn't understand why. And then when I opened the paper, I understood. Because they carried the story across the whole page. One story across the whole page. I've got the story at home. And with photographs and everything. And some people in the newsroom were very upset because they said what I wrote wasn't true. And others were smiling from ear to ear. So I felt that what I had written is true because, I interviewed the people. And soon after that, an anonymous donor gave money to the Cape Times to start a fund for these families, because it became a big thing. Started a fund, and then I suggested that they said they were going to get Shoko to help to administer the fund, and then I suggested, why don't you bring the people together instead of just making a decision and that. So they asked me to help bring the people from the retreat area. And so I brought some of those people. It was a Sunday afternoon, and then one hall were all these people. And the social workers were busy and stuff. And it was about 3 days, it was 2-3 days after that, when I got detained in the middle of the night. And the man who had killed Imam Harun, Spijker van Wyk, he came to detain me. And you know, he looked just like Hitler. He had a little moustache, he had a middle path, you know, like that. I tell you, and that was the beginning of a very rough ride. Because when they finally took me, they searched the house for an hour, and when they finally took me out, I said, am I going to Paulsmoor? Are you taking me to Paulsmoor? I asked him. So he says, Paulsmoor is a 5-star hotel compared to where you're going. And so, just, you know, they tortured me, you know, just, they believed that, when I look back, they believed that the ANC, I was part of the ANC, and the ANC was telling me to do all these things, which I wasn't. You know, I became, through that whole process, I became really convinced of supporting the ANC. But I wasn't part of any, I was part of Grassroots, the community newspaper, which was journalists coming together to try and help communities. But I wasn't part of any other organization. And after that, my life was never the same again, because I'd been in the belly of the beast. I'd seen all these things and how people were being treated. I was taken to the Sanlam Center in PE, and they wanted to throw me down there, you know, the way they threw people down. And I just about experienced everything, you know, just about everything. And till I was unconscious, and, you know, they beat me and they dragged me and I mean, how do you recover from that? After that, my life was just only one track, that I had to change all this, that I had to be part of whoever was trying to change it, because I thought it was so humiliating. You know, it was such, I was broken down. My father was detained, arrested and brought and put on the phone to me so that I could confess, you know. And it was only 5 years later, when I was detained again, this time I was pregnant with my daughter, and I didn't tell them anything, that I sort of regained my, you know, self-respect, sort of, you know. But because I knew now what was happening. The first time I didn't know what's going on. I didn't know. I was just terrified out of my mind. I didn't know what's going on here. You know, what are they trying? You know?
And the colleagues that, you know, and your managers at the Cape Times, did they support you during that time?
They did.
They said they would.
They did. They were all there when I appeared in court, because I was brought to court and I was charged with possession of 3 banned books. And I went on trial, and I had, to give you a sense of how it was then, this is 3 banned books, including Wretched of the Earth, Frantz Fanon, Time Longer Than Rope, Eddie Roo, which were, it's like history books or whatever, but it was all banned. So they couldn't get anything else to charge me with. So, because they had to charge me at that point, because there was so much attention on my case. I didn't know, but there was just international attention on my case. American senators signed for my release, 54 of them. Journalists, you know, it was just like, and I didn't know. Maybe if I knew, I would have even felt stronger. Yes, when I came from the bottom and up into the court, the court was packed. And my colleagues were there, the editors were there, the owners of the newspaper, the managers, the management side were there. You know, it was really, really, really incredible because other journalists didn't have that often. That's how you always have to look at what you gained. I mean, of course, I wouldn't want anybody to go through something like this, but I choose to look at what I gained through that. And what I gained was an insight into how the system was, and understanding what was happening to people, and an empathy that I couldn't be having now if I hadn't lived through that, you know. And that impacts on my writing, of course.